Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Tonight, we're going to be focused on the last election and why the Conservatives lost, why the Liberals won. And we're going to be talking to an insider, someone who's worked for Tim Hudak, a Conservative leadership premier aspirant in Ontario, and also for Gordon Campbell, Conservative/Liberal aspirant in British Columbia with the BC Liberal Party, but some people think that party was really a Conservative party. His name is Kelly Harris. The guy is unbelievably knowledgeable. I've had the privilege of interviewing him on my show a few times previously. He's the principal of Kensington Strategies. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him, but he is a government relations, communications, public affairs expert and really knowledgeable about what's going on in politics. And he's got a slightly different point of view about why the Conservatives lost, why the Liberals won. It's not sort of the standard one you've heard from everyone else. So this is going to be an interesting conversation tonight. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. And we talked about this just before I went on the air. I'd just like to say something before we go on. Last night I was at the Empire Club event in Toronto. It was fantastic. It was from the pollsters, mainly Legier and David Coletto were the main people talking, and the Liberals pollster. And one of the things they came out with, and it really struck me, and it really upset me actually, and I've been upset about it all day.
Oh, really?
What they found is that only 65% of Canadians believed in the results of last week's election. And that was because 52% of Conservative voters didn't believe the results of last week's election, basically thinking it was fraud or other. They didn't believe it. And I'm a member of the Canadian Conservative Party of Canada. I have been for a number of years, and I would just like it if Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the party, would put an end to this and tell his membership, no, Canadian elections are the safest, freest, and most legitimate elections in the world. There is no voter fraud. I've worked on many of them from both a staffing and being scrutineers and from all levels. We have the best election system in the world. Allowing your membership, the people who believe in you, to doubt our elections, I'm not good with that. And I will say right now that if he does not stand up and say to his supporters, no, this is to end right now, then I will not be supporting him for continuing being leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And that's, sorry, Brian, I had to say that. It's been bugging me all day, so I just had to say
I appreciate that. So, Kelly, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before. 52% of Conservatives don't believe that the result of the election was fair or
no,
ethical.
They believe it was fraud.
They believe there was fraud. Now, I haven't heard about, any of the.
It's a Legier poll. It was very good, and I believe the polling firms did a very good job on this election. They were accurate as they usually are. I mean, a little here, a little there. They did a very good job. I still don't think that they know what a millennial versus a Gen Xer or a boomer is, but that's my own personal opinion. But no, I thought they did a very good job, and I saw that number, 52% of Canadians doubting the election results. I find that disgusting personally as a Canadian. And I think we need to put an end to that right now. We cannot.
I agree with you completely, and I'm amazed that it's more than half of all Conservative voters. Is this like, is anyone out there going like Giuliani was well, we don't use computers, so computers aren't wrong. That the advance polls were wrong, or mail-in polls shouldn't be
Well, we saw that during the campaign. The "Don't Believe the Poll" T-shirts. There was some people at one of the Poilievre rallies running around with the "Don't Believe the Poll" shirts. That has no place in Canadian politics. I'm sorry, that has no place in Canada. Leave that in the United States. We've seen how that has hurt their system. Leave that out of Canada. That's all I'm saying. Just leave it out of Canada.
So is anyone in leadership within the Conservative Party or campaign trying to encourage this, or is this just Republican attitudes, Trump attitudes, MAGA attitudes come to Canada?
I don't believe anyone is encouraging it, but there's something I believe that if you don't say that you put a stop to something that is happening under your watch, you are in effect encouraging it. So say no more. Or, yeah, I feel that you're encouraging it because you won't say what you need to say to put a stop to it. Because it's just so wrong. It's so un-Canadian.
Well, so I
And
guess this, I agree with you completely, but this sort of goes to my first question. Some people think, and certainly Ford's campaign manager in Ontario think that part of the problem was that Pierre Poilievre didn't quick enough distance himself from Trump and stand up to Trump. So is this part and parcel of the problem that Pierre Poilievre is sort of captive of a Canadian MAGA situation?
I think well, there's a couple things to that. And yeah, Corey tonight, I listened to him almost daily during the election on a show that he does, another podcast that he does that a lot of people listen to. So, and I generally agree with that. One of the things that I would say, and I learned this last night, that the conservative vote generally relied upon social media as their number one source of media, whereas the liberal vote relied on traditional media. Now, as a journalist by trade, and I consider myself a traditional media person as a print journalist by trade, I haven't done that in a while, but what it says to me is that the people who won the election, who voted to win the election, can read, so that's a good thing. Kidding, of course, but what I saw from that is a younger demographic voting for conservatives, also distrusting the results of the Canadian election, and that younger demographic was relying on so-called new media. That's a dangerous trend. I don't want to see that continuing in Canada. And I'm a conservative, but I will say this: we need media in Canada to be professional. And we need to rely on professional journalism. And I think that Prime Minister Carney has already made a step to do something in the past week that I was very shocked by and very enheartened by. And others have mentioned this. He held his first news conference following his win in the House of Commons press gallery. And he let it be run by the press gallery. They moderated it. They said when the questions are going to be asked, when they were going to be stopped. What this does is it brings civility and professionalism back to political reporting in this country. And I was so happy that he did that. Whether I voted for him or not, I was happy that he saw that we need to bring some civility back into our country when it comes to our politics and our media. And I'm sorry, if you're getting your news from Twitter, TikTok, whatever, that's not civility. I'm sorry. I'm a professional and trained journalist. I know how to show both sides of the story. That's one of the things that I was taught to do. And they exist out there. So I'm very happy that Mr. Carney did that. I will be interested to see if Mr. Poilievre follows suit and goes and starts doing events in the press gallery when he's back in the House, and allows the press gallery, the reporters in Ottawa, to be the ones who moderate them, so that we are
so
not
I want to ask you a few questions on that, if I could. So
Sure.
I interviewed a really smart lawyer, conservative supporter, Monday, Philip Miller is his name, who said that, and lots of people have said this, that the last election in the United States was the podcast election. Maybe the Obama election was the Facebook election, but this was the podcast election. He says he wasn't critical of the new media the way you are. He was saying that actually that what it is long form interviews with Rogan and people like that allow young people to really get to know the politicians and the character, because it's a long, intensive discussion over time, and that from professional media, from existing media, it's a 2-minute little snip, and then a bunch of talking heads that sort of opine on what they think was going on, and that people really want authenticity and the personal connection. So, has he got a point there that some of these podcasts allow? And lots of people said Prime Minister Carney was brilliant going on the Daily Show, because it sort of had a similar kind of an opportunity to speak to people directly, to show authenticity and character. What's your sense of that?
Sure. I mean, that's a fair comment. However, it's what is the basis of the interviewer and such like that. If you're going to judge it on the authenticity and the character of the person, what's the authenticity and the character of the interviewer? I'm sorry, if you are a professional journalist doing the interview and understand that you need to have there's rules around these things, and we have done them for years, and it didn't start with Joe Rogan. I remember putting out our candidates to long form interviews a long time ago. I remember Gordon Campbell doing long form interviews when I worked for him. Long form interviews are not a new thing. What is new is we have opinions of the person doing the long form interviews now. And
As part of the interview.
their job is not to get the news out. Their job is to clickbait. Their job is not to present the news. Their job is to increase their clicks and increase their viewership. And sure, I agree with that. I mean, hey, that's how they make money.
Yeah.
But let's
and to sway public opinion.
And sway public opinion. So let's not confuse ourselves with this idea that long form interviews are driving deep into the soul. Do you really think the people that are doing these long form interviews would continue to do them if you had a person like we all know down at Queen's Park, we used to have a guy, Badger, Jim Brennan, right? Do you think any of these politicians would survive a long form interview with a Jim Brennan? Like it's so many of the great journalists of the past. No, they would eat them alive. They'd tear them apart. So they don't go into those interviews. They go into interviews as long as, okay, it's a long form interview. Yes, you can touch on that subject, but don't go in too deep and try not to touch on that one and be nice. No, that's not journalism.
Okay, so second question.
That's advertising.
I agree. It's an infomercial, and I agree completely. I try not to do that. I try to ask you the tough questions, and you're great at answering them. And by the way, I never allow people to say, don't talk about this. I always talk about stuff. I heard this statistic, and I have no idea if it's correct or not, but that something like 65% of all of the stuff on X and Facebook and Instagram in regards to the last election was the creation of bots, and so therefore may or may not have been real people, and they were just sort of. Have you heard anything like that?
You continually hear stuff like that during elections, and this is another one of the things that I would really like to see him, whether it's Prime Minister Carney, Mr. Davies, the new interim leader of the NDP, or Mr. Scheer, the interim leader of the Conservatives. What I would like to see. And I don't know how you do this, and I don't want to seem to be high-minded on it. I think, and this is another conversation that came up last night, was one of the presenters was talking about their 8-year-old child playing Minecraft and repeating commentary from Pierre Poilievre, actually, like his top hits, the carbon tax, Carney, and stuff like that. And they were learning these phrases because of the pop-ups on Minecraft. I got to tell you, Brian, I think we should have some rules around whether or not these pop-ups can go on games on the internet, like kids' games. Like I find this very offensive. An 8-year-old child getting pop-ups on their games from political leaders giving their top hits of like calling things about other leaders. I found that during the broadcast, during the presentation last night. I just shook my head. As somebody my better half, she has a 10-year-old, soon to be 10-year-old daughter. Happy birthday, Brianne, by the way. She's not listening right now, but she's in Calgary, not here. If she plays these games, and if she was getting pop-ups from politicians, I would be very offended.
So why is that bad and having a really hard-hitting commercial during a hockey game, okay.
Why not? Because that's okay. That's okay. And oh, by the way, did you notice that? I don't know if you noticed this because I don't know if you watched much of the Leaf Ottawa series. Sorry, Brian, just making a joke to you at your expense. But almost every commercial was Mark Carney. It was not Pierre Poilievre. That's something else I noticed quite frequently. We've accepted that. And I think part of the reason we've accepted that in sporting events because we've also accepted that people don't watch it without parental supervision, like adult supervision. And I'm talking about games that kids are playing on their tablets by themselves in their rooms or on the field at why they don't play games at recess at schools anymore. But that's a totally different question.
Okay, it was a rhetorical question. My last question on this topic, and then we're going to take a break and come back to the key of our discussion. And this is a little bit of a rhetorical question, but I really want you to explain it if I could. Part of the reason why I thought this press gallery press conference was so powerful was the disaster of the press conference after the leadership debate, and some of the people that were invited there. Can you describe or describe what happened, if you could, and whether you agree that was a disaster?
Yes, it was. And it was because the National Debate Commission is a national disaster and needs to be reformed. And it needs to be reformed with the help of the National Press Gallery. And it needs to be reformed with the help of the leadership of all the parties. National media, I'll tell you a very quick story, Brian. I was public information officer during the avian flu in BC, and we were doing a massive event, or pardon me, a massive press conference, and there were several live cameras, and a particular journalist kept interrupting the panel that I was moderating. And I stopped as a reporter. I thought I had the grounds to say this, and I just said to them, that question's been answered 3 times. I'm going to shut you off, and if you keep interrupting, I'm not responsible for what happens to you outside the door with these other reporters. Journalists, we watch over other journalists. I remember Jim Travers throwing a pencil at an 8-channel reporter in Calgary one day because they kept interrupting him. I think it was Jim Travers from the Star, but if it wasn't, I'm sorry. He's up in heaven right now, I think. Journalists should be the ones deciding how those news conferences go. It wasn't. The Debate Commission allowed in a group of people who were, and they did not control it. There were, I believe, 5 reporters or questioners from Rebel Media of the first 6 questions. Like, how is that even remotely a good way to run a press conference? I don't care if it's Rebel Media. I don't care if it's the Toronto Star. I don't care. You don't get that many questions in that short a time. I do not care what outlet you're from. And that was a failure of the Federal Debate Commission, and it needs to be looked at right away.
This is an interesting conversation with Kelly Harris, a conservative, historically conservative activist, organizer, campaign person who is today running his own public affairs, government affairs consulting company. He's worked with the Conservative Party in Ontario as well as the Liberal Party / Conservative Party in British Columbia. And we're going to take a break and come back, and we're going to ask him about whether this election was about Trump or about change, and who won and who lost and why. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. We're back, everyone, with the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Kelly Harris. He is a principal of Kensington Strategies. It's a boutique government relations and communications firm based in both Toronto and Calgary. As I mentioned, he's got a great background in conservative campaign organizations in Ontario and BC and across the country. And we're talking about who lost and who won and why in the last federal election campaign. Kelly has been a major daily newspaper reporter. He's been a columnist for various publications, including legal trade magazines. He's worked in Indigenous government relations. We had a really interesting interview. When was it? 2-3 years ago about Indigenous relations relative to pipelines and things like that, which is going to come back again. So we should chat about that. He's represented Canada internationally in Vienna and Singapore with the Credit Union Congress, where he spoke on right-sizing regulations for medium and small financial institutions. And finally, he's been in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill as part of a delegation during the U.S. Credit Union National Association Government Relations Week, promoting Canada's credit union system as the best one in the world. Kelly Harris, thank you so much for joining us again. So we were talking a little bit about podcasts versus regular media demographics before the break. I now want to come back, and that was really interesting. Thank you for that. But I want to now come back to this idea of, was it a vote about Trump, yes or no, or was it a vote about change? And how did that impact the Poilievre versus Carney campaigns? Over to you.
If you listen to the pollsters, and again, this is not me beating up on pollsters, because I think our pollsters do a fantastic job in Canada. The outcome was a 6 of one, half dozen of the other, Trump versus change. However, I think if you just peel back the onion a little bit on that, if we go back to the 1st of January, the entire vote was change. Pierre Poilievre was 27 points, 25 points in the lead. It was all a change election. Everything was going to be change. Then you had a couple of things happen. Change happened. I mean, really, we saw Chrystia Freeland, know what metaphor you want to use. Let's just say she put an end to Justin Trudeau's government and he is prime minister, and
but also his policies
and his policy. Well, a little bit, and I'll talk to you in a moment about that. And what we saw was change at that moment, and then we brought in a guy like Mark Carney, who has a better CV than everybody else on the stage combined, and a person who had a calming influence over Canada. And we saw a change from Justin Trudeau's destructive policies, and I'm sorry, they were destructive, especially in Western Canada, and a guy whose entire CV prior to getting into politics was he was a part-time drama teacher, which we hear all the time, running against a guy who hasn't had a job in the private sector, to my knowledge, since he was 31, in Pierre Poilievre. And Jagmeet Singh, who, I'm not going to beat up on Jagmeet Singh. I've always liked the guy. It's not my type of politician. I'm not going to vote for him. And all of a sudden, we had the change of putting in somebody who had international respect, a very powerful CV, a calming influence, and just the ability that Canadians looked at and said, yeah, you know what, this guy sounds like a prime minister. He's not angry. He's not looking for fault everywhere, which we saw from Mr. Poilievre. And yes, I understand that he was an opposition leader. That's what he did. And I believe change was probably 80% of what 80 to 90% of what Canadian electors wanted back in early January. And part of that change happened when we got rid of Justin Trudeau, which, by the way, I think the Liberal Party has trapped in a basement somewhere, chained up, by the way. I've said this for a while because we haven't heard from this guy forever, and I'm pretty sure that was a strategic decision. Anyway, we saw that change. So that change dropped down. And then you had Trump come in with his, 51st state garbage. And we listened to basically, when we started seeing an outpouring of Canadianism and pride in Canada. And I actually believe that the peak of that was when Mitch Marner made that beautiful pass to that gentleman who shot the goal and scored to end the Four Nations Cup. And it was so good to see a Maple Leaf do that. I know the other guy who scored was another team, but whatever. And we had this explosion of this Canadian pride, and a lot of us haven't felt that in a long time. And at that point, we saw the change from somebody we didn't like in Justin Trudeau, and I'm sorry, he was very disliked in this country by the time he left, paired with the pride in Canada and the anti-Trump, and you saw basically an explosion of the liberal support that we didn't think we'd ever have. Like we didn't like back in the fall. There's no way people were predicting this. Although the Liberal Party did think that they could get a minority, they just needed Trump. Trump would get them a minority, but that's a different discussion. So when we say was it Trump versus change, I think it was a combination of the two that happened at the same time, but we didn't understand that the change was happening when the leadership of the Liberal Party changed.
Well, and that when Carney won, and he immediately announced some pretty significant changes in regards to elimination of the consumer carbon tax, implementation of a middle class tax credit, et cetera. So that he was not just a change of an individual, but change of policies, some of which, frankly, some people have criticized that he stole from the Conservative Party.
Yes, and what I meant by I wasn't speaking of that, I would, yes, if that is what he had carried through with and stayed on that path, he probably would have won a fairly significant majority. I have well over 200 seats. And then he came out with that platform that felt like it was written by was written for Justin Trudeau if he was still around.
So too big of a deficit.
It was too big of a deficit, yes, and it's okay. You can explain deficit governments and all that sort of stuff, but I'm talking about the policy itself. It just did not. So it did not react to what was happening in Canada. It didn't deal with crime properly. It didn't. It just felt if you remember the policy launch, which I thought was just a complete abject failure, and I don't think any of the policy launches were particularly good. But then again, I don't like policy launches generally, and my background of it, they don't tend to do all that well. And maybe that's why Doug Ford never does them because, he didn't do them in his first election. Everybody was screaming about it, and I was one of the people saying, "You always criticize us that our policy destroys us in elections." So he isn't releasing one, and now you're criticizing us for not releasing one. You told us not to. So anyway, my point being is the Liberal platform was probably the low point of Mark Carney's campaign. And then the Conservatives started for the first time actually seeing that they needed to do a pivot.
Well, and they finally pivoted and took off some of the attention from Pierre Poilievre and the slogans of Axe the Tax, et cetera. And, lots of comments about how there were seniors playing golf that were all of a sudden the focal point of some of the commercials. So let me ask you, do you agree, therefore, with Ford's campaign manager that the problem was that Poilievre didn't focus on Trump? Is that the problem?
It's one of them. It's one of them very, very sincerely. My question is, with the voter base that he has, and now we see 52% of his voters don't even believe the results of the election. Does it matter what kind of pivot he did? We heard many times during the campaign, Mr. Carney's hiding his taxes and all of these other things. And I think a lot of Canadians think Pierre Poilievre was hiding his MAGA hat under his bed. And even though he did a pivot, it was too late and not strong enough.
If he's hiding his MAGA hat under his bed, is running in Alberta the right decision?
I think that particular seat is a pretty safe seat. No,
but I know long term, wouldn't it have been better if he had found something in Ontario or, there's safe seats in rural Ontario.
Yes, there are. There's plenty of safe seats in rural Ontario, and I think that this is all about it. I actually am critical about him jumping back in the House as quickly as he is. Tell you the truth,
the poor guy that's going to be a couple of months shy of his pension.
Yeah, well, and the reason I say this is I think it would have been better if he showed a little more actual humility and said, "Look, we just lost an election. My job isn't how quickly I can get back in the House, but how quickly we can take a look at why we lost this election and talk to Canadians about how we can do a better job representing them in the future so that we can win the next election." And I haven't heard that. And I'm concerned about that because the reason why he was so high and the reason why the conservative vote was so high, and I truly believe this, was the sheer anger towards Justin Trudeau and his government. If, say, Mark Carney can find a way to hold on for 4 years, is that anger going to be there in 4 years? And the other thing is, will Donald Trump be there in 4 years? Yes, we can talk about that. So how do you hold the vote you have and build on it and bring down a guy who, let's say, maybe he makes mistakes, maybe he doesn't. And there are a couple things, mistakes, potential mistakes he could make this very week, this weekend, in the next week and a half, Mr. Carney. And if he makes them, I've got some real concerns, and that has to do with his cabinet appointment. So my advice would be, Mr. Poilievre, yes, you can be in the House very quickly, though he's not going to be in the House until September, so it doesn't matter. I just felt that that was a rushed thing. I just think he should have taken a beat and taken a breath and thought about and just be more thoughtful of how he conducts the next election.
I
Maybe given just the natural time, who knows?
I also think he should have picked a seat out of Alberta. Safe seat, yes, but out of Alberta. And I do think that I am not sure if 4 years from now the Maxime Bernier PCP vote that went from 6% down to 1% will still be with the Conservative Party. And so therefore, if you took off 4 or 5 points because of that from the Conservative vote, the only thing he can do to win is by appealing to a bigger tent. And I don't see him doing that yet. And so that's what I think he needs to do. And that's what I think Ford has done very successfully. And I think that's what some other conservative politicians across the country that have been long-term successful have done. We got to take a break, though, for some messages, and we're going to come back with Kelly Harris in 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. We're going to go through several different issues that Kelly's identified as critical turning points or mistakes or successes in the election campaigns for both parties. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Kelly Harris. He's a political campaign expert, primarily with the Conservative Party in Alberta, British Columbia, and Ontario. He runs his own boutique public affairs, government affairs communications firm in Toronto and Calgary today. And he's talking about the election and why the Conservatives lost, why the Liberals won, and some of the critical points. Kelly, you gave me a list of major mistakes. Can you run through us what you think some of the major mistakes are?
Well, I think the biggest mistake that Mr. Poilievre made was not letting the media on the bus. But
really, you're kidding?
I'm a journalist, man. Kidding. I thought that we saw this in the polling numbers that the major media, like traditional media, skewed heavily towards the Liberal Party. No major media on the bus tour for Mr. Poilievre helped that skew. I mean, who were they talking to? All they had was B-roll or that absolutely horrible interview with Laura Stone, which I still find to be, might have been the worst mistake of the campaign from the Conservative side of things, where it was basically two guys in a locker room challenging each other. That's what it felt like. But one of them was a guy and one of them was a female reporter, and the guy who was doing it was having trouble with female vote. That was just, that may go down in history as one of the worst campaign moments I've ever seen with media, to tell you the honest truth.
Why? Was he a bully? Well, was he misogynistic? What's your?
I think I'm not going to say he was look, I'm a guy. I don't think it's my place to say he was misogynistic. I'm a guy. I think that's a woman's choice to decide. What I will say is he was struggling with women, female vote. Anything that you even remotely challenged a woman on that campaign publicly, in that case, I'm not talking about another politician. I'm talking about a journalist asking questions and him saying, "Well, haven't you seen the size of my rallies?" That just sounds. I found it. I found it kind of. It was kind of weird.
Some
Actually.
people loved it, thought it was sort of like Trump saying, I've got the biggest rallies ever.
Yeah, I didn't, and I listened to a lot of people talking about this campaign, and a lot of women that I listened to talk to said it was very uncomfortable.
A lot of females have said that there was an ick factor. What's an ick factor, and how do you develop an ick factor?
Well, I don't call it an ick factor. I call it likability. And anybody who's worked on a campaign knows that likability is a bit of a dog whistle for if you don't have likability, it's a dog whistle for women don't like you. And it existed. And I'm not saying all women, and I got to be careful here because I get beat up a lot by this when I'm talking to, especially to my conservative friends about this who are probably have voters, and they say, "Well, I like them playing fine and blah, and all this sort of stuff." And it's like, no, I'm not talking about partisan people. I'm talking about that other section of Canadians who only know these people running for, well, in this case, Elizabeth May, pardon me. They only know who these people are at election time, so they're brought into it. So they don't know who they are, and it's like a visceral reaction to somebody when you say the ick factor or the likability, just your your initial reaction to somebody. And I've heard that. I hope that he can find a way to knock that down, and if he stays on, that is a serious concern on his voter base.
Were all the ads with his wife and the touring and the rallies with his wife and the speeches by his wife helpful? And were there a way of trying to get rid of that ick factor?
Well, yes, every campaign does this, especially if
I saw a lot more of his wife than I ever saw of Carney's wife or Trudeau's wife, frankly, when she was around.
Well, I'm not talking about liberal campaigns. I'm talking about conservative campaigns specifically, Brian. We tend to do that an awful lot.
So there was a guy in power and politics that actually used a stronger word than ick factor, and said it was caucus members that thought that. I'm not sure if you heard that comment and what you think.
Yeah, I have heard that, and the thing about caucus members, especially during an election, if things are going great, they tend to be the most supportive people in the world. If things are not going great, they tend
find
to be
somebody.
They're your biggest critic by far. So it's and campaign managers. Whoever, if you're a campaign manager and the election's not going well, you are the most critical person of a central campaign you'll ever meet.
So is Jenny Byrne's days numbered?
I think Jenny is a strong enough person that she'll be able to come back from anything. Will she be able to survive this as the federal conservative campaign manager? That's a tough question to answer, Brian. I'm sorry. I don't mean to skirt that, and
That's
I don't
okay.
intend to skirt questions.
The other thing you said was the lack of a believable pivot. What do you mean by that?
There was too much Trumpiness before Trump started threatening Canada that was baked into Poilievre's persona.
So that he couldn't go anti-Trump, given that
that when he did, it still had a believability factor, a lack of believability factor. I'm sorry to say it that way. It just when Mr. Carney came out and said Canada will never be the 51st state, and he went that way, we believed it. When Youngmeet Singh said it, we believed it. When Mr. Blanchet said it, we believed it. When Mr. Poilievre said it, it was kind of a, yeah, but, you know what I mean? And it was that, yeah, but kind of.
Well, part of the problem he had is that there was a significant, group of conservative supporters that actually wouldn't mind joining the United States, according to the polls. That what was 18% of conservative supporters would actually support joining the U.S.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Yeah, that's one of those things where, and you see it at rally, and it's one of the issues with the Conservative Party, of which all conservative parties across, we are not a single monolith. We are a coalition party, and we have various people from progressives all the way up to basically U.S. Republicans that make up the party. And one of the things that Doug Ford has done really well is he's been able to work with that coalition. And Mr. Mulroney did a very good job. Mr. Harper did a very good job of holding that coalition together. And one of the issues is when one part of that coalition spins off into the distance, getting them back is really hard. And we have a tendency not to be able to say, well, who else are you going to vote for? And I've had these conversations. I've said this many times. When I worked at Queen's Park, I don't know how many times I said when we were doing these meetings with these extremely interesting conservatives, the landowners, for example, it was like, who else are you going to vote for? And then the retort. Well, the retort was, they'll find somebody, and then we're in real big trouble. And it was kind of like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So how do you appease all the way?
But let me challenge you that for a second, if I could, because I think
Sure.
what Doug Ford, the best example for me is Roman Baber, who was kicked out of the Conservative caucus provincially because of his, and he wasn't actually anti-vax, but he was anti sort of the mandate. So, but very supportive of the trucker convoy and potentially anti-vaccination, et cetera. And he won with the federal Conservatives with a sizable, sizable plurality. And so in that situation, actually, the tent for the federal party was bigger, albeit it went right wing in its biggerness, and whereas in its width. Versus, I think that what Ford did is he said these ideas aren't comfortable, and so he may have lost people to the anti-vax parties and stuff like that, because they did get some of the vote in the last two provincial elections, but he was able to maintain more people in the center. And so Ford grew to the center, Poilievre grew to the right. Is that not fair?
I think I think that's fair. And I think that Ford also did something else that Mr. Poilievre didn't do. And what it would be, and it's this theory, in this is just a regular world theory. In every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the more right Mr. Poilievre went, the more he created a voting base on the others, the anti-Poilievre, the anti-conservative voting base that combined all the other parties in Canada, and which
so strategic voting to make sure Poilievre didn't win.
Exactly. And this is the first time we can actually point to an example of strategic voting that en masse worked.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the Liberals, though. What do you think the Liberals did right and wrong?
What they did wrong was they took the foot off the gas when it came to the Trump stuff, and they released a policy, a platform that was just terrible, and they didn't stay on the "we're here to save Canada" from Donald Trump, and they allowed people to back off of it a little bit. And when you saw their numbers change every time they met. Remember those early ads in the campaign of how Pierre Poilievre speaks the exact same language as Donald Trump and everything? Yep. When the numbers were soaring, I didn't see a single one of those ads in the last 2 weeks of the campaign. And I don't know who made that decision, but that was just that was one of the dumbest decisions I've ever seen. Like you've got, it's like watching a hockey team with a 2-goal lead and say, okay, let's play defense now. It's no. You got to lead. You end the game. You put your opponent away. Now there was also some people within the liberal leader in the campaign who said, the more we put them away, the more we give license to the Bloc and the Green and the NDP voters to come out the shadows and vote for their candidates rather from the strategic voting. So they were playing a kind of a interesting game there. However, I still think they should have kept their foot on the gas when it came down to the Trump stuff, and they would have won the campaign. So I think that was a mistake.
They won the
Now,
campaign. Just you think they would have got the majority?
yeah, majority. Now, one of the things that I thought they did very well, and sorry, I mean the other than Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney, I think the most talked about person during the election was actually Corey Tenike from Doug Ford's campaign manager. Corey's strategy in the Doug Ford campaign was every time Doug Ford, all of a sudden he was down in Washington and dealing with Donald Trump and all this stuff. And one of the things I thought the federal Liberals did very well was this is a new candidate, it's a first-time campaigner, and the stress and the energy it takes to campaign, he's not used to. He's never done it before. So all of a sudden they're like, okay, he's going to go to prime minister mode now. let's just take him off the campaign. And now he's dealing with the Trump threat. And everybody's like, oh well, yeah,
That is more important.
but was he doing it? A couple in the beginning there was a couple things where he was announcing what he's doing, but the last couple times you went, it was just like you were dealing with the Trump threat. Like what did you do? You did nothing. There was no announcements, and for that reason, I think it was a wonderful strategy, and it was taken right out of the Doug Ford playbook in the Ontario election. And I thought that was a fantastic move by them, actually.
In that regard, I got to ask you a question. I had this interesting debate with someone who said that the mistake he made was not going to the Pope's funeral because he should have gone and he should have had breakfast with the Prime Minister of England. He should have had brunch with the President of France, and then he should have had a tete-a-tete in St. Peter's Basilica with Donald Trump. And if he had done that, he would have won a huge majority. And he didn't do it because he thought it would have been appropriate to interrupt the campaign to go to the Pope's funeral, but that he missed a huge opportunity. What do you think of that? If you were advising the leader, would you tell him to go to the Pope's funeral or go out to one more rally?
And I will actually go back into my mind, like in recesses of history. First off, you may or may not, I'm not just a Catholic, I'm a practicing Catholic, Brian, and I thought Pope Francis was a wonderful world leader, and I'm going to miss him very much. Do you remember when Diana died?
Yep.
And Jean Chrétien went to Diana's funeral. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien went to Diana's funeral. And he wanted to take his wife, Aline, or maybe he wanted to take her, but this was the story. He wanted to take her, and she said, no, I'm going to Mother Teresa's funeral. And I always remember, I thought about that. That struck me when Pope Francis passed away, and people were asking whether or not Prime Minister Carney should have gone to the Pope's funeral. And I thought about that, and I thought to myself, no. He did the appropriate thing. He sent the Governor General. And that is what I think should have happened. The Governor General of Canada is our head of state. So the head of state went, and I'm sure it probably ate Mr. Carney alive, the fact that he couldn't go. I thought it was the appropriate person to go at that time. I thought the people advising Mr. Carney did the right job, and I will give a big shout out to a person who I am very friendly with, Marco Mendicino, the Prime Minister's chief of staff, and I think that all Liberals, if you vote in talking about this campaign win, one of the people that you need to basically shake the hand of and pat the back of, Marco Mendicino did a heck of a job during that campaign, keeping Ottawa on the straight and narrow. I don't think the Liberal campaign did I didn't think the campaign was very good, but I thought the way Ottawa was handled, whether it be the Pope's funeral, whether it be get off the campaign trail and be prime minister for a day, that I truly believe was Marco's influence. And that was, so if you're saying the positive things about the Liberal campaign, that's right at the top of the list for me.
Well, that's good. If he's a bad campaigner or not a great campaigner, but a great prime minister, I'm happy with that. We're going to take a final break and come back with some quick concluding comments with Kelly Harris in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting with Kelly Harris about, what the Conservatives have done wrong. I got to ask you, Kelly, though, you said that you're worried about what Prime Minister Carney could do this coming week in regards to the cabinet. What's your concern?
My biggest concern is who he puts on the front bench, or honestly, who he allows on the bench. I mean, we always used to say this guy's so far on the back bench that we put him in the hallway, and that's where Mr. Wilkinson and Gibault need to be. Take a breath, do it for Canada, do it for your party. You've been cabinet ministers for a long time. You're not liked. You're really not liked by anybody who digs a hole of any kind for a living. Those two need to take a break, take a beat. Do it for your party, do it for Canada, because they are the fulcrum of the Trudeau anger that still exists in this country. And if Mr. Carney wants to turn the page and create a new relationship with Western Canada and with, as I say, anybody who digs a hole for a living of any kind, then those two need to spend some time, just a little bit of time away. And if you look at some people, you don't have to look far. Look at Steve Clark in Ontario. He's doing pretty good as House Leader. He took some time away. Take a look at Marco Mendicino. He took a beat down from the Liberal Party. He's now the chief of staff to the Prime Minister. It doesn't mean your career's over. It means take a step back, take a breath, and rebuild. But right now, those two are not needed anywhere near any bench. That includes a minister's title.
Chrystia Freeland?
She deserves an Order of Canada from the Liberal Party, actually. Honestly, yeah, give her heritage or something like that. Nothing with any meat to the bone, but I think you have to.
Who should he appoint Minister of Finance?
I think they've got the right guy. Frankie Bubbles, Mr. Champagne is Francois Champagne. He's fine. He's inoffensive. Let's be honest. You know who the Minister of Finance is going to be for the Liberal Party of Canada and Canadian government?
Mark Carney.
Mark Carney.
Okay, so let me ask you. He's got a guy. I don't know if I'll remember the name. It's either Tom or Tim Hodgson, who is who won in Markham Thornhill, I think it is. He's got a resume as long and as impressive as Mark Carney's. He was president of, I think it was Goldman Sachs Canada. Unbelievable credentials. Can you put a newbie in as Minister of Finance?
I wouldn't put him in as Minister of Finance, especially in that riding. A Quebec Minister of Finance actually gives a much better handout to Quebec, because they no longer have. There's a path for him to destroy the Bloc Québécois right now. So do it.
Okay, two last quick questions, if you can fit it in. How long is this government going to last? And is Pierre Poilievre going to be the Conservative leader in that election?
I honestly think Mr. Carney, if he makes the right choices, I think this could be a 4-year government. And that's a 6-5 and pick 'em whether or not Mr. Poilievre's going to last. I mean, just take a look at the last 3 leaders we've had of Conservative Party of Canada. Mr. Harper lost, and well, he was done. But Mr. Scheer and Mr. O'Toole, they didn't get the leeway that Mr. Poilievre's getting, and I don't know that he can survive 4 years, especially if Mr. Carney does a good job.
Kelly Harris, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online, even from Calgary, at www.saga960am.ca. Go Leafs, go.
No. Go Leafs, go.
Go Edmonton, go. Go
Go Leafs,
Winnipeg, go. All of
Go
them
Leafs,
go.
go.